I'm recording as well. Okay.
So let's see what we have. I want to be in PowerPoint first. Okay, then we'll come to the, and I don't want to be at the end, I want to be at the beginning. Okay, there we are. Recognize that? So, so hi everybody. For us, it's good evening, everybody. For you, it's of course early afternoon. We've already lit Hanukkah candles on Sunday night. And we even have a picture of our own Hanukkah candles in here, but it's lovely to see everybody again, and welcome to this, what a lovely opportunity to be together again in Stanford with Bethel. So here we go. Tonight's theme is going to be Hanukkah, Hellenism, and Herod in Rabbi Hammerman's shul. For those of you who grew up on Sesame Street, was it Sesame Street? Tonight's presentation is brought to us by the letter H. Right? All right. And I kind of picked up on something the rabbi just said a moment ago, and I put King Herod in parentheses with a couple of question marks, because that's what I really want to focus on this evening, especially in relation to the Hanukkah story. Why is he called King Herod the Great? Over on the left, by the way, is our windowsill with all of our family pictures. And you see we've already lit our fourth night of Hanukkah. As we move ahead, that's me. You don't have to introduce me. You know who I am. I've had the pleasure of being with the TVE many times in the past, and looking forward to this evening. And we'll talk a little bit about the website at the end. The website, we'll come back to this. Okay, before we talk about King Herod, I want to talk about this street sign. Now, I put it up here for two reasons. The second reason will become a little bit more apparent in just a few moments. But the first reason is because street signs tend to be significant in Israel. As you go from city to city, you can learn a world about our history, both modern as well as ancient, as well as the personalities that shaped history. Again, ancient, Middle Ages, the great scholars of the Middle Ages. There's a Rashi Street and a Maimonides Street, and modern Zionists. I mean, all of them have names all over Israel. And in Jerusalem, as well as a number of other cities, there's a 29th of November Street. I figured, wow, this is an appropriate sign to begin with, because we're only 2 weeks after the 29th of November. What is it that the 29th of November merited its own street in Jerusalem and a number of other cities? So to a certain extent, the 29th of November is almost more significant than the day that we celebrate as Israel Independence Day. We celebrate May 14th, or the 5th day of the Hebrew month of Iyar of 1948. Well, just 6 months earlier, on the 29th of November, the United Nations voted on what's called the Partition Plan, which enabled Israel 6 months later to declare independence. It also, by the way, enabled the Arabs, the Palestinians, as they call themselves today, to have a state of their own in the zone, which was also defined by the UN borders. We did declare independence. They declared war because they wanted the whole thing. But that empowerment, which enabled us to move ahead on May 5th, May 14th, 1948, 6 months later, was the events of the 29th of November. We celebrated, this is one of the main papers in Israel announcing Medina Ivrit, a Hebrew state. In those days, there were far less countries in the United Nations than there are today. So the vote was 32 in favor, 13 against, and 10 abstentions. And in the lower part of this headlines from the Yediot Ahronot newspaper, you have the list of nations that voted for and against. As an ironic side note, to the best of my knowledge, it's the only time in the United Nations General Assembly that the United States and the Soviet Union voted the same way on the same motion. Usually when we vote yes, they vote no. When we vote no, they vote yes. Back on November 29th, 1947, they both voted in favor of the establishment of a Jewish state. And we celebrated that day. This is the picture taken in front of the Jewish Agency on Melech George Street, King George Street in Jerusalem. People dancing at what appeared to be the final step towards our statehood, our independence. Again, another side note, Ben Gurion looked at the events of that evening and the next day with all the dancing and revelry And he writes in his memoirs that in a way this is a sad day because he knows that it's not going to be so simple, and that the UN, while on the one hand empowering us to fulfill our dreams, we are also now committing ourselves to a path of action which will cost more Jewish lives. And indeed, before the next year would unfold, we finally had an armistice agreement in March of 1949. We lost 6% of our 6,000 people, which was 1% of our population. So put that on American terms, with how many proportionally with the amount of lives we gave for the War of Independence. Ben-Gurion knows it wasn't going to be so simple, but at least on the 29th we rejoiced. Against that backdrop, I asked the question, how come there's no Herod Street? Right? I said in the earlier part, we have streets commemorating major events as well as major personalities. Some of the names we're going to encounter in the next few moments have streets named after them. You might recognize the name of Alexander Yanai Street or Shlom Tzion Hamalka Street, which are two streets in downtown Jerusalem, two of the Maccabean dynasty king and queens. There's no Herod Street. How come? So let's put that question aside for a moment, because you won't find a Herod Street, as far as I know, anywhere in Israel. And let's talk a little bit about Herod against the backdrop of Hanukkah and one of the tiulim, one of the trips that we put up on the website a few weeks ago, a trip to the place called Herodian, which happens to be the place where King Herod is buried. So Herod is born in the year 72 BCE. Now, where does that put him in terms of an historical time frame? We'll see that in just a few moments. It's towards the end of the Second Temple period. And he lives till the year 4 BCE and accomplished an amazing amount in his 37 years that he ruled over Judea. Things that we're familiar with, that we attribute to Herod. And again, probably help us understand why he's called Herod the Great. But we're going to understand why Herod the Great isn't seen as being so great against the backdrop of Jewish history in a few moments. First of all, on the upper left, the wall. I mean, I was looking for the right picture, and I just didn't find the right one. This will have to do because it's a picture we're all familiar with. Many of us have been to the Old City and looked upon this scene of the Western Wall, which is just one little piece of the large retaining wall that Herod built around the Temple Mount. Of course, where we see the gold dome today was where we saw the ancient temple standing 2,000 years ago. And I put in the same frame Ma'armat Machpelah, which is another building built by King Herod in the city of Hebron. The reason I stuck it in the same frame is because the stones on the Kotel match the same architectural style as the stones in the Ma'armat Machpelah, which is the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs in Hebron. Indeed, if you look at the upper part, let's see, can you see my arrow? We have found fallen stones that match this pattern, which once existed in the upper part of the wall and had been destroyed. So the wall around the temple actually looked like the wall around the cave of the patriarchs and matriarchs. The two buildings, which were very, very similar, probably the two holiest places in Judaism, built by King Herod. Physically, he didn't build them himself, obviously, but masterminded by King Herod during that 37-year rule of his. We've all been to Masada. I'm sure many of us have. A picture of a group up on Masada, also King Herod. Caesarea. I couldn't resist the left-hand picture because it's the famous aqueduct, and I took that picture actually last year on Hanukkah, on the first night of Hanukkah, when I was there with a Ramah group that I was guiding. Probably more famous and or equally famous is the Roman theater, emphasizing the word Roman theater on the lower right in Caesarea. Also, King Herod. But despite that, you won't find this sign anywhere in Israel. And I want to figure out why not. In order to do that, let's look a little bit at the history of King Herod. And I have 3 successive slides now before I'm going to move us over to Herodian, which tell us a little bit about the genealogy and the background of King Herod. First of all, Herod's family tree. That's a short family tree. I'm sure many of you on the TBE trips or other trips participated in the archaeological seminars program at Beit Guvrin. The dig at Beit Guvrin? Well, Beit Guvrin is the place where Antipater the Idumean lived, And indeed, Herod was born and probably grew up in Beit Guvrin at the site of that archaeological dig. Many of you probably know what happened if you remember from your being there at the dig. The Maccabean king, whose name was Yochanan Hyrcanus, gave the Edomites, the Idumean residents of Beit Guvrin an ultimatum, said, listen, either you convert to Judaism or you have to abandon the place. Many abandoned the place, leaving us the opportunity to have an archaeological dig there now in the 20th and 21st centuries. A few did convert, including Antipater and his wife, whose name was Cyprus, who was an Nabatean, to non-Jewish people, obviously. And they are the parents of King Herod. So Herod attributes his Judaism to being the son of a convert, not a natural born. Now, I mentioned that in the background of the U.S. Constitution, because you know that it's not so crazy if you think of the U.S. example of having a particular restriction of who can be king. In Jewish tradition, the kings were to be descendants of David, King David, of David HaMelech, and from the tribe of Judea, or the tribe of Judah. Converts were not considered valid as kings. So when Herod became king, that was a tremendous departure from Jewish tradition and didn't add to the love that many of the Jewish people felt for him. But this was his etymology, his genealogy. Thank you, genealogy. I still don't know why I'm in such dark here. He's the son of converts. I emphasized in this picture that Herod marries Marianne, the Hashmonaid. Hashmonaid is from the family of the Maccabees. So let's look at the Maccabee family tree for a moment. Boop, here we are. All right. Well, these are names we know. By the way, I couldn't resist putting in this other picture that I took last year on the beach at Caesarea. It was the first night of Hanukkah, the night that I took the picture of the aqueduct in the sunset. Our group lit our first night Hanukkah candles on the beach there at Caesarea. But more importantly, I want to focus for a moment on the family tree of the Maccabees and names which, I mean, I learned these names in Hebrew school. Some of you know I grew up on the west side. I went to B'nai Jeshurun. These are names I was familiar with. Mattathias, who ultimately fomented the rebellion and spurred the Jews of Judea, at least some of the Jews of Judea, to revolt against the Greek Assyrians. His famous son, Denethir, Judah Maccabee, one of 5 brothers, all of whom participated in this great battle against the Greek Assyrians back in when? 140s, we'll go in order. 160s, 150s, 140s BCE. And now we have the genealogy, and I'm not going to go through each step, but I want to show where Herod enters the picture. So if we go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations, we have a king named Alexander Yanai. He's married to Shlomtzion. We'll see that on the next slide in a moment. They have, I'm sorry, this is, okay. Alexander Yanai is over here. He's married to Shlomtzion Hamalka. They have 2 sons, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, which I always found rather interesting because look at the names of the Maccabees. Mattathias, Eliezer, Yonatan, Yehuda, Shimon. By a few generations later, and one of the things the Maccabees were fighting against was the Hellenization, part of which was using Greek names. By 4 or 5 generations later, the Maccabean dynasty of kings, look at their names: Alexander, Aristobulus, Hyrcanus, Alexander II, Antigonus, not exactly names from the Jewish Bible and from Jewish tradition. In any event, you see down by the 6th generation, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's a daughter born to the Maccabean dynasty named Marianne, and Herod marries her not out of love, but to give himself a greater authenticity in the eyes of the Jews who knew this Jewish tradition that the kings had to be descended from the tribe of Judah. Now, the truth is, when the Maccabees themselves declared themselves as kings, look at John Hyrcanus, actually the first declared ruler from 134 to 104 BCE. This itself is a departure from tradition because the Maccabees are Kohanim, which is why you see here that various of the sons of Mattathias served as the high priest after the rededication of the temple. But now the Maccabees assumed the throne as well. And many of the Jews objected to this because we were now, in modern terms, putting religion and state in the same hands. Traditionally, there was a separation. The priesthood, religion, was in the hands of the Kohanim, which is the tribe of Levi, the Levites and their descendants, and the who were Kohanim, who were priests. And kingship was in the ancestry of David, who was the tribe of Judah. So there was always a separation. The Maccabees in late Second Temple times defied that path of history and declared themselves kings. So here we now Herod declaring legitimacy by marrying a Maccabean named Marianne. A little bit more detail now. Marianne, King Herod, in this particular slide is called Herod the Great, how the Herodian dynasty meets with the Maccabean dynasty and merges. Now, just a quick word about how Herod became king, and then we move over to Herodian. And for that, I just want to give a little bit of history, and then we'll go over to our site for this evening. All right, this is the history, basically, of the Second Temple period. Remember, the first temple is destroyed in 586 BCE by the Babylonians. We are in exile for 70 years. I didn't put it in, but just for a historical time frame, in those 70 years when we were in exile in Babylonia, we have the holiday of Purim, or the events of the holiday of Purim taking place. Purim takes place in Persia, Babylonia, Persian Empire, Babylonian Empire, between the destruction of the first temple and the return of the Jews to rebuild the second temple in around 515, 516. I'm not sure why the particular reference that I took this from said many Jews returned from Babylonia. You see it says many over here. According to Ezra, in one of the later books of the prophets, there weren't that many. There were only about 5%. Most of the Jews preferred to remain in, well, look at modern American Jews. I mean, today close to 50% of the world Jewish population lives in Israel, but 100 years ago, it was less than 5%. It's very hard to pick up and make Aliyah. Many of you who have tremendous love of Israel aren't exactly picking up and making Aliyah for good and for valid reasons. And Ezra confronted that same problem. He was thinking, wow, it's only 70 years. Everybody is going to pack up and come back to Israel. Well, it's not the case. 95% of the Jews stayed behind. They already had businesses. They were raising their families, second, perhaps third generation growing up in Babylonia. They had built homes. They had a building fund to pay off for the shul and the JCC. And, you know, it wasn't so simple to pick up and move or to even be major supporters of the efforts to rebuild the land of Israel. In any event, against that backdrop, we have some Jews coming back, the rebuilding of the Second Temple, and now in the year 332 BCE, the Hellenist Empire, the Greek Empire led by Alexander the Great, conquers the region and incorporates Judea, ancient Israel, into the Greek Empire. That's 332. Alexander the Great had a united empire. After him, there was a split between two people, the Seleucids and the, in Syria, and the, why did I suddenly go blank? In Egypt. Out.
The Ptolemies.
The Ptolemites, thank you, Ptolemites, thank you very much. I don't know who said it, but thank you. In any event, by the middle of the 160s BCE, one of the Seleucids comes to the throne, and it begins to institute very, very burdensome practices against the Jews, restrictions of practice. Now, I'm going to plant a seed, which will come up later on. The main battle, I believe, was not a battle against religious values, it was a battle against Hellenism. It was a value against the importation of the Greek culture into the land of Israel, and the resistance by some, because there were Jews who said, wow, it's not so bad to have the Greek culture in the land of Israel. There are many wonderful things about the Greeks. There were others who took a much harder position, and eventually that erupted into the fighting, which was the Maccabean revolt of 166 to 160. We are victorious, as you know. It gives us the Hanukkah story, but let's move a little bit further on to put the things I want to talk about into a context, and we'll come back to Hanukkah in a few moments. We have now the chart that I showed you earlier, Jewish autonomy under Hasmonean kings, the various generations of the kings, autonomy, independence, and that continues through the year 63 when the Roman Empire now, led by Pompey, conquers Judea, replaces the Greek Syrian Empire, and now we're under the period which historians call the period of Roman rule, from about 63 BCE up until the beginning of the Byzantine period in the 4th century. So we have the beginning of almost 4 centuries of Roman rule, including the ascension in the year 63, in the year 40, what was it, 47? Herod takes the throne. Anybody remember?
47.
Right,
47. 47.
It was 47, thank you. 37, right, 37, sorry. Including King Herod in 37 becoming the ruler. Just a very quick word about Herod and how he became king. He's part of this Maccabean dynasty. He sees the 2 of the brothers who preceded him fighting for the throne to make a very complicated political intrigue story very short. Herod jumps over to Rome. He convinces the Roman emperor, whose name is Mark Antony, to empower him to be the king of Judea. Antony is perfectly happy to see somebody who is ruthless and strong and very what's the word I'm looking for? Well, let's call it ruthless for now. Keeping things in check, sends him a few Roman legions to help him. And Herod now is the undisputed king of Judea, having put the Maccabean pretenders to the throne in their respective places. It was Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. Both of them wanted to be king. And Herod says, too late, guys, I'm king. And Herod enforces his rule by basically putting to death anybody whom he thinks is his opposition. And so, although he marries Mariam, the Maccabean, to gain legitimacy, later on when he believes that she and her sons are plotting against him to take over the rule and put it back squarely in authentic Maccabean hands, he has her killed and her 2 sons killed. Her brother is the high priest at that time. He invites his brother-in-law, his wife's brother, to a party at Jericho, to his palace in Jericho. Says, hey, why don't you go and play water polo with my guards? And he goes after the ball and doesn't come up. He kills his brother-in-law, and that's how Herod rules, Herod the Great. Again, just to put this into the total historical time frame before we jump over to Herodian, we have finally, after Herod dies, the kingdom begins to break up. The control is not nearly as strong as it was under Herod. We also have the period of Jesus in this time frame of King Herod. Caesarea, by the way, is the site of one of the only place that I know of in Israel where a stone is found bearing the name of Pontius Pilate, who presumably presided over the trial of Jesus. So this is the period of the roots of Christianity in here. In any event, by 70 years after King Herod, the country erupts in revolt once again, this time against the Romans. I believe for much of the same reasons, and I believe that people that pushed this result look back historically and said, wow, the Maccabees did it, and they obviously had God on their side, and they won. We're going to do it also. We have God on our side. We will win. It was a devastatingly wrong miscalculation, as we all know, and the Romans prevail. The temple is destroyed, and all of that is here in the year 66 to 70. Masada, the final stand, is 73. One last gasp rebellion against the Romans about 60 years later, led by Bar Kokhba. And after Bar Kokhba, we basically have lost any semblance of Jewish autonomy in Judea. So against that background, I think I'm going to come back to that later. I want to go now to another thing and take us. Any questions so far, by the way? That's the intro. All right, let's go to, it jumps around. Where do I want to be?
Peter, we can go full circle by saying that was the last opportunity of Jewish independence until November 29th, 1947.
So I'm glad you said that now, Josh. I was actually going to end with that. And yes, you're 100% correct. That was the last gasp of Jewish independence up until the United Nations. So let us now go to, I think this is where I want to be. Okay. All right. And what I'd like to do is devote the second half to the story of one of the places that Herod builds. It was not in the list that we looked at before, the Western Wall and the Tomb of the Patriarchs or Caesarea or Masada, but Herod was a master builder. And one of his masterpieces is a place called Herodian. And we visited Herodian on one of our recorded trips a few weeks ago. It's up on the site. This is what's known as the B-roll footage for that trip. And this is Herodian. It's actually not far from where I live. And so when I was out at the site, I was there with Debbie and her two sisters, both of whom live in Israel, and our family, their husbands. And we spent a morning exploring Herodian, which is another one of the masterpieces of King Herod's building in the land of Israel. This mountain looks like a truncated cone. Some people call it a volcano. It's a natural hill, but it's man-made. In other words, the actual fortress on top and all of the ultimate shape was built by King Herod, but he's the master engineer of the ancient world. Herod built Masada. Herod moved 500-ton stones into the walls of the Kotel. So let's spend a few moments exploring the site known as Herodian, which Herod named for himself because it was one of his favorites, and indeed was the place that Herod asked to be buried. And so we have here something which we only have found in the last 15, 20 years, King Herod's tomb, a Roman theater, which we'll visit in just a few moments, and the fortress on the top, which is very different from anything else that Herod built. It's a round fortress. This is in the visitor center when we go in. And so we are going to momentarily walk up to Herodian, but not before we also take a glimpse at a massive palace that Herod builds for himself in the valley at the foot of Herodium. This is an amazing, amazing site. One that, because of its location, isn't necessarily as popularly visited as others, but today there's a new road that connects it with Jerusalem. And so rather than the grand staircase, actually I should have pointed it out to you, if you notice back in Herod's time, we'll see this staircase at the end. Let's come back to the beginning. That the fortress was ascended by a grand marble staircase up the side of the mountain. The National Park Service for us has built a different access route. So we will be taking, oops, now we'll pretty much go in order. We're going to be taking this road up Herodian and to the summit. As we walk, you're supposed to be moving. Why isn't it moving? It will. Well, maybe the next, there we go. Okay, so walk with me as we walk around the cone to Herodian. As we do, we actually have a very lovely view of the section below us. And now you can probably guess what this is. This has not been fully excavated and restored yet, but this is Herod's palace, a huge pool, colonnaded area here, the massive palace that we saw in the model a few moments ago. And this takes us, that was the view of Lower Herodian. Here we are walking up and coming up to the top with the palace once again in the background. And we come out on top at, let's see, here we are. That's me. Let's see, you might notice that back then, I'll explain the bandage on my hand because you might ask. The week before we had filmed Nachal Prat, and I fell in Nachal Prat and broke my pinky. So that's what you're seeing in these pictures here. This was the good situation because after 3 weeks of being in this bandage, it wasn't getting better and it was still aching and it was terribly swollen. I went to a hand specialist who said, yeah, you need surgery. This thing is, it wasn't set properly. So the following week, if you saw pictures of me, I actually had a cast up to my elbow for 10 days. And now you can see those, back to the bandage. Hopefully this comes off tomorrow. But we're now at the summit of Herodium. Probably Herod picked it because of its spectacular view in every direction. And like his other amazing building projects, Herod was not satisfied with anything but absolute grandeur. So we look around, and again, some of our family up now on the summit looking out over the beautiful view. This view surrounds the mountain 360 degrees. In this particular view, we're looking out towards the west. On a really clear day, you can see the tall buildings of Ashdod in the Mediterranean out here. This is the area known as Gush Etzion, where I live. Just up here on the right are the outskirt neighborhoods of Jerusalem. And in the next picture, a lovely model of what this looked like, a 7-story tower in keeping with the style of King Herod, which we see in the background. I think I kind of raised the camera. There we are, that remains the tower. And these smaller circular towers at the points, this is the east, this is north, west, and south, and that is the summit of Herodian. Now, what I want to underscore here in this particular time together, and we only have a limited time, but I'm also going to invite you, and I'm going to take the opportunity to pick up, before I do it at the end, to please, please join the site. It is, you know, we spent a lot of time thinking how to make it top quality and cost effective. And we have a full tiul of Herodian. Full tiul is 15 to 18 minutes on the site. But I want to, in particular, point out 2 things which are relevant to this evening, or this evening or this afternoon. One of them is the place that we're standing at right now. Again, our family, and we are looking at what has been identified as the archaeologists as the remains of a Herodian bathhouse. Now, when I say Herodian bathhouse, I really mean a Roman bathhouse, because if you look at the sign, I think I come right in here and I'll stand by the sign for a moment. Herod, when he became king, was determined, and now I believe this is the common link between the Maccabean rebellion of the Hanukkah story and the rebellion against the Romans some 200 years later. The common link was a fight on people who opposed the encroachment of Hellenization, which even in Roman times, the same term was used. It meant the importation of the elements of what today we would call Western culture. In those days, it was called Greco-Roman culture, first Greek culture and Roman culture, into the land of Israel. Some people welcomed it and said, wow, that's amazing. You know, we can live in the 21st century and still maintain Jewish values and Jewish tradition, but not cut ourselves totally from the values of the Western world. And there were some people who opposed it tremendously and said any imposition of Greek or Roman culture of Hellenization into the land of Israel was objectionable. And when rulers began to now enforce that on the population, it broke out in revolt, both in Maccabees' time, Mattathias and his 5 sons, the Maccabees, as well as in Herod's, as well as in Roman times, which the rebellion now 70 years after Herod. Let's look inside this room and you'll see one of the clues of the grandeur of the bathhouse. And here, those of you who've been to Masada, this might evoke memories of some of the fresco paintings. There we go, come down. Right, okay, there we are. You might just see over here, can you see my pointer? Here we are, the remains of a fresco painting, which means plaster, which is decorated. We're looking at the inside walls. It's like looking at the 2x4s in your home. But we don't have 2x4s. We have plaster, and then either they're painted or they're wallpapered. This is the ancient wallpapering. They were plastered over the raw stone and then beautifully decorated. So we have just a clue of that grandeur here in Herodian, here again. But the point I want to make here is the importance of, to Herod, the bathhouse and the importation of the culture. These are pictures taken inside the synagogue, including a mikveh or a ritual bath. It's interesting that we believe that in Herod's time, let me just go back one, that in Herod's time, this was not used as a synagogue, but was probably used as a community room. But it has all of the general architectural form of large gathering rooms. And probably when the Jews were here during the rebellion against Rome, some 60 years later, they turned its function into the use of not only just the public meeting room, but into a synagogue. And these pictures are taken in the synagogue. So again, we have the synagogue, but we have, let me go back, that's not the one I wanted. where is it? Oh, it's on a different roll. I'm not going to show it to you because I have to go to a different set of footage. But one of the other amazing features of Herodian, which I'm not going to dwell on now, say hello to Debbie and our family, is an amazing underground water system, which Herod actually carved into the bedrock of the mountain. Remember, we're up on top, right by where the synagogue was. There's a staircase leading down, and you come down to these amazing tunnels underground. This is an incredible trip for kids. I've had families here. This is like the fun part of the trip for them. I just stop talking, just let everybody enjoy going down and exploring. And you eventually come. There's Debbie and my sister-in-law, Judy, who just made Aliyah from Englewood, New Jersey about 4 months ago. I think they came the height of Corona. And it takes us into, here we are, one of the large water cisterns built by King Herod on the mountain. So again, this is explained in a lot more detail on the Tiyul on the website, but these are the steps that people would have accessed back then in those days in the water cistern. It's not what I wanted to focus on in the amount of time we have. But here you are, the large cisterns in this particular thing. There's Debbie looking at the sign. It's very well signed, both interesting in Hebrew, English, and Arabic, you notice. And there were people there the day we were there. We were there in the height of Corona, maybe 3-4 weeks ago. And, you know, there were other people there keeping our distance and wearing masks. But, you know, people are coming out to the sites in Israel. The other thing I really wanted to emphasize, though, was this section over here, coming out of the cistern. And we saw this in the model at the beginning. We've begun to excavate the Roman theater. Now, this Roman theater is at this magnificent spot. If you remember, we saw it in the model at the beginning. It's overlooking the valley below. Coming into view, you'll see down here is the lower palace. But the theater is up here on the hill, Roman columns. The week after we were here, they opened this up, and there's now a movie shown, which I haven't even seen yet. But the Roman theater is now available and restored for people to explore. And right next to the Roman theater, do you remember this from the model? The staircase leading up the mountain, we have exposed and reconstructed the staircase. It will eventually be available. You see it says railings now for people to climb the mountain. And the last thing that I want to mention at this point is the tomb, because this is where Herod himself wished to be buried. And the tomb remained elusive for many, many years. It was only until 1992, 2002. Wow, it ends in a 2. I want to say 2000, I forgot the year. The lead archaeologist in the site from the 1970s was a man by the name of Ehud Netzer, Alav HaShalom, blessed memory. Netzer was one of the archaeological team under the leadership of Yigal Yadin, who was a name many of you may be familiar with, who was the lead archaeologist in the excavations on Masada back in 1964 and 1965. Netzer was a young archaeologist then in the 60s under the leadership of Yadin, who was actually the, I'll throw names out which may or may not mean anything. Yadin was the son of Sukenik, who was the first head of archaeology at Hebrew University, and his son Yadin inherited that love. In any event, Yadin had trained Netzer. Netzer became the head archaeologist at Herodian in 1972, and for the next almost 30 years had made his ambition not only excavating and restoring the site, but discovering the location of Herod's tomb. Now, how did we know Herod was buried here? Because we have the writings of Josephus. And again, I don't want to go into Josephus. He's mentioned in our Masada trip, as well as our Caesarea trip. Probably the Herodian one I mentioned as well. But Josephus describes in great detail the burial procession, bringing Herod to Herodian, the burial itself, the magnificent tomb which is erected in his memory and in his honor. Herod did not want to be forgotten. And Netzer discovered the tomb, and again, I want to say 2002, but I may be wrong. Tragically, Netzer died at the site, or while excavating the site. He leaned against one of these fences while they were being built. Wasn't at this particular spot, but tumbled backwards and fell down a 10-meter embankment. Here's the theater again next to the steps. and was killed basically, which was a tragedy. He was in his 80s at the time, and but very much alive and very much active, and one of the leading world experts in Herodian archaeology and in Herod. And to die so tragically at the site which had spent so much of his life dedicated to was a tremendous tragedy. But he died after having discovered and identified the tomb. And as you saw at the beginning, it is being reconstructed. And we're able to walk out. Let's come back to, here it is again. I did put it at the end. Here it is, okay. Herod's tomb, again, partially reconstructed, the grand staircase, the great theater, and of course, the mountain. Well, let's go to the other one. And now having seen it, let's look once again at the models we saw at the beginning. I'll take it in this one. Here we are again, just another perspective of the model with all the various elements of Herodian. It's an amazing site, but now it underscores something that is really what was my theme today. Herodian is another masterpiece of Herod, as was Masada, as was Caesarea. Each of them had amazing, amazing architectural features heretofore unknown in the world. The ability to bring water to a barren mountaintop in the middle of the Judean desert. Herod was a master at that. The terraces at Masada. I think I have that on a different, you know what, I'm not going to bother. You've been to Masada, you know what I'm talking about. The palaces at Masada, the incredible construction. Caesarea, the port that Herod builds in Caesarea. One of these is Caesarea, I don't remember which. It's this one. All right, there's the theater at Caesarea. But I have also a picture of the port, which was a man-made port. That was unheard of. Creating a harbor with cement that hardens when you drop it into the water. That's what Herod did at Caesarea, at Caesarea. Every one of his building projects was a masterpiece. The Western Wall. Some of you, I'm sure, have taken the tour through the Western Wall tunnels and seen those massive stones, the largest of which is 570 tons, the average of which is about a 4-ton stone, and many of which are in the 200 and 300 and 400 ton weight category, which was an amazing building project of an incredible engineering feat. So Herod was called Herod the Great for good reasons, because Herod was the mastermind behind all of this. I'm going to leave the stop share. I'm going to stop share in just a minute. I'll come back to this. I want to go to the general view of everybody. I often tell of a story which is a midrash on the parsha which we read about 7 or 8 weeks ago at the beginning of our book of Genesis. When we read about the book of, in Noah, the story of Noah, towards the end of the weekly Torah reading of Noah, we have the story of the building of the Tower of Babel, right? You know, people wanted to build a tower that was massive and this incredible engineering feat and reach up to heaven. And the midrash there, which is quoted by the great biblical commentator Rashi, says something very interesting. What was the great sin that caused God to ultimately confound their languages and doom the project to failure? So he says that whenever a workman got up on the scaffold, when they dropped a brick, they said, quick, get another brick. When a workman fell, they said, quick, get another workman. You know, there was no sensitivity to the fact that a human life had been lost. Bricks and workmen were treated the same. If a workman was killed, if a brick was broken, just get another one, just replace it. And obviously Rashi's message there is that clearly bricks are replaceable, human life is not. And I often imagine Herod was the same type of a ruthless foreman as well, building some of these things. You know, he turns to the supervising engineer and he says, listen, I want to build I want to bring water from 4 miles away, build me an aqueduct. Right? You didn't say no to Herod, because if you would question him, you'd say, well, you know, that's really not engineering. We don't have the technology for that. So, you know, your guy who says that would probably be doomed to die within the next few seconds, and somebody else now appointed to take his place who would say, yes, sir, we'll figure out how to do it. And that's moving 500-ton stones, and it's bringing water from miles away, and it's building massive theaters and massive pools and all of the incredible things that Herod accomplishes, including at the site Herodian, which is an amazing site to visit. That Herod was ruthless in his attempts to bring the grandeur of Roman culture into the land of Israel. He was going to out-Roman the Romans. He was going to outdo them in his engineering, in his architecture, and ultimately show that the land of Judea, which we today call the land of Israel, could well be a shining example of everything that Rome stood for. And that is what ultimately doomed the Antiochus, the period of Hanukkah, that attempt to impose that Roman culture, even on Jewish elements that were not so open to it, because there were Jewish elements that were. And ultimately that same outlook resulted in the doom of the destruction of the temple. And as I said earlier on, I think the mistake of the period of the temple destruction, the year 70, if I went back to my timeline again, is, you know, they look back to the Hanukkah story and they say, wow, here were a bunch of religious zealots who brought about a huge victory. Obviously, God was on their side and they had this amazing victory. We have the amazing holiday of Hanukkah, which is a victory of Jewish values over Hellenization ultimately. And you know, here we are 200 years later, and people of the same mental ilk are saying the same thing. Wow, God's on our side. He certainly doesn't want our country to be Romanized and Hellenized under Roman values. You know, they beat the Greek Empire, which was the superpower of the world then. We can beat the Romans, the modern superpower. But it turned out very differently than the Hanukkah story, which is why we celebrate Hanukkah, and we don't celebrate, you know, we commemorate with Tisha B'Av, with fasting, the events of Herodian, the events of the destruction of the temple. And that's going to bring me back to Herodian just for one moment, if I can find it. It's over here. That's where I want to be. This is not where I wanted to be. It's the wrong place. That's the other one. It is this one. That's where I want to be. No, that's the PowerPoint. I don't want PowerPoint. I want this one, right? Okay. So just a side note about Herodian, which kind of ties this all in. We, a number of years ago, used to actually go to Herodian for the reading of the book of Eicha, or Lamentations, on Tisha B'Av night. You have a magnificent view of Jerusalem. We saw that earlier on in my presentation. You have a magnificent view of Jerusalem from the top. And indeed, I think Debbie and I found it very meaningful to say, wow, you know, we were up here at the same place where Jews were on Tisha B'Av in the year 70. Herodian fell after Jerusalem. And so they actually watched the flames of Jerusalem bursting out and the temple being destroyed. And we were being privileged now in a rebuilt land of Israel some 2,000 years later to, you know, to go back there and be on that same Herodian now as free Jews. And this is where I was going to introduce what Rabbi Hammerman mentioned earlier. And so November 29th is a very poignant day today because, you know, Hanukkah was a rededication. Hanukkah was a rededication, a rebirth, a reestablishment of Jewish sovereignty, and to a very great extent. First of all, many people see the great miracle of our victory in 1948 as a parallel to a tremendous military victory against powers that militarily and numerically overwhelmed us. Many of you know Harry Truman was urging Israel not to declare independence. He thought we would be doomed in the battle, but we won. And so the victories of Hanukkah that we celebrate during these 8 days have a certain parallel to 1947, 1948, and the rebirth of Israel, the rebirth of modern Israel. And trying to keep within my 1 hour time limit, that's basically what I wanted to show you about Herodian. I'm going to go and take any questions, but I do want to end with one thing. Let's see, I'm going to go to the end here. And just a comment and an encouragement. So this is the picture I want. There we go. So we've had an ad running in a number of publications in Israel and through our Facebook and our media over the last couple of weeks that our website is a wonderful Hanukkah gift. Just before I got onto our Zoom this evening, there was an email that we have a family that was buying 2 Hanukkah, people live in Israel buying 2 Hanukkah, 2 memberships for their parents back in America, the 2 sets of grandparents, so they could tour Israel and they were going to watch them together with their grandkids. Many of you know that our site is accompanied, this happens to be the Herodian one, but every Ti'ul is accompanied by what we call the Israel Discovery Zone, which is a activity sheet, first some information, further information about the site, and then children activities or family activities. Rabbi Hammerman, I don't know if you have a chance to look at them yet, but they're there as well. And I just simply would, I'm going to come off here now, just to remind you, though, that our website is israelisbeautiful.com. And I forgot to post the piece that was up in the Jerusalem Post this weekend. We had a post in the In Jerusalem section of the Jerusalem Post of things to do during Hanukkah. And it was only a blurb. It was like they asked us to give us 50 words. You can't write a lot in 50 words. But then they kind of edited it, and they did better than we did in writing it. And they said, wow, this is something to do. If you're stuck at home during Hanukkah, you can get out and see the country in short, engaging tiyulim. It's just really a nice piece in the Jerusalem Post. And we invite Stamford, Connecticut to join us in Israel on these tiyulim. We have posted our 16th tiyul to the website. It is a story of the menorah at the Knesset. Let's see, you know what? I could probably even, let's just see. Should I bring it up? Well, you know what? I'm going to let you go to the website. It's up there. It's there. And I'm happy to take any questions. That's my presentation about Herod. And you know what? I do want to end with one thing. Let me go back to this and throw one added point in here, which I have often made. This is the PowerPoint page. I'm not going to open up and get down to this page again. So why isn't there no Herod Street? So I think we understand. Herod was a master builder. Herod was a ruthless leader. He killed his family. He killed many of the rabbis. He killed much of the opposition. Yes, probably there was not too much unemployment and a very high economic standing during the periods of his rule, but he was hated. And he was great for his building, perhaps, but not a great person. And I often, when I guide Caesarea, I say this, of all places, when I guide Caesarea, I end up by telling people, you know, it's amazing. I was, Debbie also, we're very active in the Hillel at City College in New York. When we went to CCNY, we were both active. We were both officers of Hillel. And it's no wonder to me that Hillel, who said, don't do to somebody else what would be hateful to you if done to you, which is his interpretation of love your neighbor as yourself. Do to somebody else what you want when done to you. The person who welcomes a potential proselyte and says, what's all of Judaism? That phrase that I just gave you a moment ago, now learn the rest. And that it's no wonder to me that the Jewish organization, which crosses the spectrum of Jewish life on all the college campuses, is called the Hillel organization. And you have Hillel houses on most college campuses internationally now, and you don't have Herod houses, despite the fact that some people call him Herod the Great. He may have done some great things. There were a lot of things were not so great about him. We recognize the greatness of Hillel, not the greatness of Herod. Our tradition is a Hillel tradition, not a Herod tradition. Rabbi Hammerman, to you.
Yes. So we have a couple of minutes for questions if people have them. I did want to ask you, just because of Hanukkah and all. I love the presentation, by the way, Peter. Thank you so much. I mean, I actually have never been to Herodian. It just hasn't been on the. We always have so many things to see, and it's sort of in between for a lot of the trips, and it hadn't been as developed as it is now back then. Although the mountain was always just imposing to look at, this cone sticking up in the air. But because it's Hanukkah, the symbol of the menorah, which you see throughout archaeology, throughout Jewish history, probably more than any other Jewish symbol, has become, especially in that period, late Second Temple period, very much the symbol of Judaism. You see it on the Arch of Titus as it's being carried off of the temple.
To see the video.
What is the, I guess, what's the key to understanding the symbolism or the origin of it, perhaps, in the research you've done?
So that's a fascinating question. By the way, you could all unmute yourselves and comment. As I mentioned, the posting on this week's site, on our website this week, israelisbeautiful.com, everybody, is about a 16-minute piece about the menorah.
This was unrehearsed and spontaneous.
Right. And I was debating, except that we had talked about this ahead of time, perhaps doing the menorah. And for those who want to come on again, I'm doing the menorah tonight, because on Sunday nights, one of the things we do on the website is a Meet the Guide live on Zoom, and I'm doing the menorah as the theme tonight for the members of the site, and I invited a lot of other people. So let's say we usually get about 15, 20 people. So the menorah clearly was one of the key symbols of the Beit HaMikdash. When the temple is described in the book of Exodus and the book of Shemot, there's a huge amount of detailed description that goes into the building of the menorah. And the menorah was one of the key elements in the Holy Temple. The tabernacle first, the portable tabernacle, the first temple, and the second temple. The truth is, you know what? I think I could even quickly pull up a slide on that. Let me do it fast. If I go back to here, and I go back to here, that's not what I want to do. I want to share. I want to go here. I'm in my, oh, here we go. Okay. Here we are. So here we are. This is, can you see this?
Yep.
Yep. All right. So this is me in front of the menorah. This is the menorah that stands at the Knesset today. But fairly soon into it, let's see how close I can hit it. Somewhere in here. All right. 1 second. All right.
Yeah, we can't really hear.
Yeah. So what I'm saying here. What I'm saying here is that the, I want to get the volume down and I can't, is that when the temple was destroyed, the major symbolism, by the way, we know now that a lot of the artifacts of the temple were carried off by Titus, the victorious general, and put into a museum, which opened in the year 82. In Rome, right near the Colosseum. And the menorah evidently was a central feature. People came from far and wide to see the menorah of the Holy Temple. So to a certain extent, I think part of the answer to your question is this I've discovered is that we owe this to Titus, who made this massive menorah a central feature of his victory museum in Rome. And then, let's see, I think it's only like a couple of seconds beyond here. I'm saying about the museum right now, and here we go. Here we go. Okay, here's the Arch of Titus in Rome, and I begin the narration on the recorded thing on the site. Here we have with the come on, there it is. Okay, is the Arch of Titus. Oops, is the menorah in the Arch of Titus. And so I think to a certain extent, the Romans helped elevate this massive symbol. And so we find over the next centuries of exile that the menorah becomes a symbol within an artistic symbol on coins, in synagogue decorations. And I have examples of these in the video here. On mosaic floors of synagogues all over the country in the 3rd and 4th and 5th centuries, the mosaic, the artwork always features a menorah. The menorah became the symbol of the yearning for Jerusalem. You know what? We are a living miracle. You guys in Stanford, us here in Israel, whose hearts have never let go of the connection with an ancient homeland. There's no precedent in history for that except for the Jewish people. And part of that is that it crept its way into our artwork and it crept its way into our holidays. And we think of Jerusalem at the Passover Seder and at the Yom Kippur service. And here, synagogues all over the Galilee in the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries had menorahs on the floor. And they were pulling it back in. They were pulling the awareness of Jews back into the time that once existed when there was a Jerusalem. And so the menorah that stands today at the Knesset is very symbolic. I mean, people will argue with my saying that to a certain extent, the menorah we see carried away in this relief on the Arch of Titus has now been returned. Well, from a religious point of view, it hasn't been returned because the temple doesn't stand and there's no menorah in the Holy Temple. But there's a temple that stands now. There's a menorah that stands here outside the Knesset. Well, it's not there. It's here. That's the menorah on my passport, right? Let's get to it. Here we are. I want to get to the menorah again at the. There we are. All right. So to a certain extent, the menorah has returned symbolically to Israel because we never let go of it as a artistic and I would say emotional symbol of our yearning to return. So Hanukkah takes on tremendous significance in that regard. Interestingly, by the way, what I'm going to do at the next, my Zoom later on, there's an amazing source in the book of Maccabees. You may know this, Rabbi Hammerman, that originally the first Hanukkah was a dedication of the temple, probably modeled after Solomon's dedication of the first temple at Sukkot, which was an 8-day holiday. And the fact that the Jews couldn't observe Sukkot that year, and we had the temple in our hands by Hanukkah time, they made the 8 days a kind of like a rededication based on Solomon's dedication of the temple to commemorate Solomon's dedication of the temple, rededication of the temple. The first historical source of the 8 days is the dedication of the temple on Hanukkah to observe Sukkot, which had been missed that year because of the Greek occupation still of Jerusalem. So the menorah became a tremendously symbolic thing. You know that the prayer in our prayer books doesn't talk about the 8-day miracle even. Right? The Al Hanisim, which we say in the Amidah prayer in our Birkat Hamazon, doesn't even mention the 8 days of the miracle of the oil. It mentions the great military victory. The Talmud does, but that's centuries later. It's a fascinating study when you study the evolution of the holiday of Hanukkah and how the menorah became a Chanukiah and symbolic. Any other questions, by the way? That was a great question. I mean, did I answer it kind of?
Yes, absolutely. No, I really, you know, I wanted to sort of tie things back into Hanukkah for the menorah because so many of us look at it with such awe and inspiration at this time of year. So thank you. Other questions?
Rabbi?
Hi, Sandy.
Would Peter, first of all, Peter, it was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Where is Herodian in relation to Jerusalem geographically?
Okay, so you know what? It just so happens.
And sei gesinnt with the hand.
Thank you. Wait a minute. It just so happens, that's not the one I want. Wait a minute. It just so happens, here it is. Where am I? Yeah, here we go. Not that one. That's it. Look at that. Just so happens. Look at this. Ta-da! A map.
We're still seeing your menorah.
You're still, oh, you're not, hold on. Let's get this up there again. So it just happens to have gotten stuck here from my pathway of the patriarchs, but it works. So this is the old pathway of the patriarchs. This is Jerusalem. I don't know if you can see it. If it's big enough. This is Bethlehem. Gush Etzion, which is where we live, is right over here. We're in the city of Ephrat, which is just south of Bethlehem. Herodian is just outside the city of Tekoa, which is maybe a 10-minute drive from our house, heading eastward towards the Dead Sea. It's deeper into the desert, but it's just south, this would be southeast of Jerusalem. There's a new road which connects Jerusalem to Herodian. It's a 4-lane highway. It's about an 8-minute drive from Jerusalem, maybe 10-minute drive. So you see, it's right in the heart of Judea and very close to Jerusalem.
Within the Green Line?
No, over the Green Line.
Over the Green Line.
Yes.
Herod
Which is
didn't know
probably
about any green line.
right. Herod did not know from green lines. Yeah, no,
Okay.
the green. Remember, I don't want to get into the complexities, but it's a national park site. The National Park Institution, which tends to be very what's the opposite of conservative in its thinking? Tends to be quite liberal in its thinking. Has incorporated a very limited number of sites over the Green Line into the National Park Network, and Herodian is one of them. It's a national park site. And I say, modern Israel has connected it with a modern highway so that you don't have to go through any potentially unrest areas to get there. It's a very, very easy, convenient drive from Jerusalem. What will the ultimate disposition be? Who knows? I mean, but right, it is over the Green Line and was one of the areas conquered, liberated, occupied, pick your word, by Israel in 1967.
Thank you so much, Peter.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Questions?
Thanks. Any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat.
Oh, I didn't open chat.
No, I've been looking. So anyway.
So you know what? I love you all. I would love you even more if a few of you, please, just join us on this adventure and then share it with others. Most importantly, our growth has really been by sharing, by people saying, wow, we just hit this amazing site. We think you'd be interested in it. And the best way to be able to talk about it intelligently is like Rabbi Hammerman say, well, I'm on the site and I'm loving it. So I really hope that some of you are inspired to visit Israel every week. It's a lot less expensive than an El Al or even a United or Delta ticket, right? And I would love to see many of you on the site, I hope. But
yeah, and I really have, I've done several of the tours because as you know, I can never get enough of being in Israel, and there are places that I always return to, and those who've been in our groups know that. Places like Zichron Yaakov and Caesarea and Beit Shan, which the evening tour is really beautiful. I just, it's, and I hadn't been there at night, so it was great. But also, I just want to reiterate something you mentioned last time, Peter. As you mentioned, you're quasi-retired at this point, and it's really the others who are participating in the site who have no other source of income. And at this time, times are hard for everybody, especially for travel industry people, for tour guides. And it's our little way of helping people in Israel who help us, who go above and beyond to make our times and our visits to Israel so wonderful. So anyway, that's just a suggestion, and the Hanukkah offer was too good to refuse.
right.
A question.
A quick question.
Yes. So nice to see you again, by the way.
It's great to
Thanks.
see you.
How did one of the Maccabee sons end up with the name John? Was that a common?
Was it John?
It's not really biblical, is it?
Wow. Jonathan.
Yochanan.
Sure it is. Of course it's biblical.
No. On your family tree, it shows the name John.
Yeah, okay. That's only the site I copied it from. But Jonathan is a biblical name. King David's close friend was Saul's son, Jonathan.
Yeah. No, I know Jonathan is, but
Oh, I see. So John. Yeah, listen.
There's two, there's Yochanan and Jonathan.
Right. There's a Yochanan and a Jonathan. Now, how did
Okay.
Peter get into this thing? I don't know, right?
right. Okay, so it wasn't John. John was not.
No, it was Jonathan.
Okay.
Yeah, it was Jonathan. It's a good question, though. It was Jonathan and Eliezer. I mean, they were all biblical names.
Yeah.
So, but again, I always found it interesting that by 4 generations later, they're now Hyrcanus and Aristobulus and
Yeah.
and Antigonus. Those are not exactly biblical names. Those are taken right out of Greek culture.
And remember, some of these names are Greekified, like Jesus, Joshua. That was his name. I must admit, Yehoshua. Anyway.
Yeah, I love this one.
So, Peter, I have one other person who's just stepping into the room here to say hello. So I'll let her sit down because otherwise you won't see her.
Hey, hi, Matt.
Yeah.
I'll pull Debbie into this. I'm not sure why our lighting isn't so good because usually it's fine, but hello, how are you?
It's so good to see you. The timing of this is, I'd much rather attend your session than teach 7th graders Hebrew. But, what can I say?
Guess what? I would much rather do these sessions than have to do them for 7th graders also. I have a few of those too. And
Yeah.
This is much more fun. So it's nice to see you.
Not that I don't enjoy teaching 7th graders, but I miss you and I would love to be able to be part of your
Thank you. That's sweet. And Josh kind of filled us in on the boys last time. They're growing up and moving on.
Oh yeah, they're all on their own. How are your kids?
Doing okay, thank God. Actually,
We have two grandsons who are in the army now,
Wow. Oh my gosh.
which is another step in time. It's crazy.
Another one goes in March.
And another one who's going in March. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's, you know,
So that puts things into a certain perspective. But thank God, I'm in and out of Bidud, which is the quarantine, because people have been, exposed, and so it's been crazy.
So our son Donnie just went into Bidud for the weekend. Someone in his office was diagnosed on Thursday. So the whole office has to go into quarantine for 2 weeks.
Oh my God.
Wow.
So I just want to, I know that we have a bunch of people
I see
still on.
Leslie is there. Hi, Leslie.
Right. Hi to everyone. But if you need to take off to begin eating your latkes, have a happy Hanukkah. I'm going to post the recording of this, so if people you talk to who want to hear about it, who want to watch, they'll be able to later.
Wonderful.
Nice.
Thank you so much. And again, please, everybody, while it's fresh on your mind, go right to the website and sign up now. I'd love to see you on board. And Mara, so nice to see you.
Next time you do a session, try not to do it at this time so that I can come.
It's my doing.
Oh, okay.
I thought the bagels and lox is kind of fun. Right?
Now
Listen,
it's
I've done a few of these at 1 and 2 in the morning.
Oh my
So, I mean, I don't love it. Obviously, it's much more convenient for U.S. time, but it's a heck of a lot. I mean, I wake up the next morning and I'm kind of like white for 2 days. But 2
How's
a.m.
the
things.
weather over there now?
We've been so